Welcome to season 2 of the Elle Bee Show. I'm Elle Bee. This season, we're changing it up just a little bit. We're giving you more facts and less opinion. Make sure you go to our website to check out all of our resources so that you can do some additional research on your own. Now, prepare to get stung because the solve is not included. Oh, here we are again together, friends. Hello. Today, we are continuing on in this journey of double standards, and we are switching it up and we are going into talking about healthcare. Now, before we start in what's happening in current day, I thought it would be good of me just to give you a little history of Black women in healthcare and how we have been treated over the centuries. So that's right, we're going all the way back to the 1700s. Now, have you heard of Sarah Baartman? I'm pausing for you to answer or think about it. Do I know who that is? If you do not know who Sarah Baartman is, you can search images of her so you have a very vivid picture of what we are talking about today. Now, Sarah Baartman was born in 1789, maybe, we're not sure, because they didn't keep our birth records because we were kind of disposable as a people. But Sarah Baartman was a Black woman who was of a short stature. She was only like 4'10", 4'11", something like that. And she was on the heavier set side, which means that she had a big old booty and hips and all that other kind of stuff. So because that was her body type, she was considered to be a freak of nature. She was not just like, slender build or anything like that. And so she was treated in a manner that was not very becoming. One, because of the time period when she was born, which was still a period of world enslavement at that time, because most countries that participated in slavery or in the enslavement of African people during 1789, when she was allegedly born, they said, okay, well, as she grew and she grew all of her curves, voluptuousness, they said, something's not right. So we're going to do this testing on her. We're going to do this figuring out why she looks the way that she looks. And she was treated as if she was a freak of nature because of her size. Not okay. In the early 1800s, before she passed away, she was paraded around Europe, France, the Netherlands, England, those places. And she was taken on a tour like she was a circus act, because it was unbelievable that this woman of this size and this stature had all of these curves and looked the way that she did. Now, the disparaging part about how Sarah Baartman was treated was that, one, she was treated like a circus act and not as if she were a human. And because she was treated in such a manner, it was like, oh, we're going to take her around and we're going to show her off. And she was made fun of because of her body type. Now, when she eventually passed away, which historians say she was maybe 25 or 26, because we don't really know, because there was no record of her birth, but there was a record of her death. She was in her 20s and she potentially died of smallpox or something along those lines, or some similar disease, because they didn't know for sure, because, medicine back then was, a hit or miss. They maybe knew what they were talking about, and probably most of the time they were wrong. technology definitely has played a part in modern medicine, but we'll get to that later. So, after she was gone away to the heavens, to the ancestors, her body parts were donated to science and studied. And her organs, her brain, her big old booty, her boobs, were all on display in a museum for 150 years. Who does that? What is wrong with these people? So, Sarah Baartman was eventually buried in South Africa in 2002. Who keeps body parts on display in a museum for 150 years? Now, if we were in modern day times, Sarah Baartman would be considered an influencer, because guess who pays hundreds of thousands of dollars to get things that Sarah Baartman had naturally? Lots of women. Not just white ones, not just Hispanic ones, not just Asian ones, but Black women too. Those that were born with flat booties. Sorry, girls. If you were born with a flat booty, sorry for you. If you were born with no boobs, sorry for you. If you have voluptuous lips, sorry for you. I don't know what to tell you. If you weren't born with melanin, sorry for you. Because just because you go to a tanning salon doesn't make you a melanated person. Just makes you look like a burnt orange. But I digress. So, moving on in the historical medical field in the treatment of Black women and them being specimens, science projects, whatever you want to call it, we move on to the 1950s and Henrietta Lacks. Now, there is an amazing book about Henrietta Lacks, her story, her life, how she was treated, which was very well written. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It'll be on the resource page, so you can go check it out there. And her story is a very sad one. Henrietta Lacks grew up in Virginia on a tobacco farm. And in 1951, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer, and she passed away at the age of 31. She had 5 children. She was married. So her sales, like most sales during that time period, were taken from her, unbeknownst to her family, and they were studied. So in the early 1950s, late 1940s, when cancer was really coming about in this country, doctors, not just in America, but around the world, had no idea of what caused cancer, really how to treat cancer in any form. Brain cancer, cervical cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, any type of cancer. It was a new disease that was taking over in people, and they had no idea of what they were doing to cure it, to fix it, to treat it, to make people better. So, Johns Hopkins, which is where she was, Henrietta Lacks was at Johns Hopkins, which is in Maryland, Baltimore specifically, or close to Baltimore. I don't know if it's in Baltimore proper, but that's where she went to go get her treatment. Since the cells were taken from her to be studied, the doctors, thought most cells that they were taken, they were going to die. Which, from other people, the cells lasted maybe 2 or 3 days outside of the body. they weren't able to be replicated. But her cells, which is known as the HeLa cell, just so you know, HeLa, Henrietta Lacks HeLa, okay? Her cells were not only replicated, but they were used to help study different diseases. Here's where the story gets a little more devious. Because it was common practice not to tell the patients or their families that their cells were being studied, the doctor who was able to replicate her cells did that, took it to Johns Hopkins, well, the upper levels of the internal management people at Johns Hopkins, and said, hey, I've been able to duplicate these cells or reproduce these cells, and now we're able to study these diseases. So guess what they did? They reproduced the cells in abundance, and then they sent them out all over the world and have studied several different diseases and found cures for a lot of things from these cells. And who do you think benefited from that the most? I'll pause here and let you think about that. If you said her family, you are wrong. Incorrect. Of course it wasn't her family. Her family didn't even know that these cells were still living until 1975. 24 years later. You know who benefited? Johns Hopkins. You know who else benefited? The doctor that replicated her cells. You know who else benefited? Other nations around the world. People won awards. So when I say awards, you know, I mean like big awards, like the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, the study of the HeLa cells has generated 3 in sign language, 3 Nobel Peace Prizes. The first one being in 2008 for the discovery of different viruses that lead to cervical cancer, which means that it is what? Preventative care. The second in 2009 for the discovery of telomeres, which I had to look up what that was. So it means DNA sequencing, which what helps to study how people get what? Cancer. The third, which was in 2014, was in chemistry for the development of new microscopic techniques. So 2008, 2009, the awards were physiology and medicine, and then 2014 in chemistry. So her cells, all these years later, you know, after the main discovery that they could be reproduced, have gone on for people to study decades later, and then win awards, and her family got what? Next to nothing. There are several other things media-wise that talk about Henrietta Lacks and her story. There was a movie done on a cable network, which I'm not going to mention because we're not sponsored by them. So there's that. There's the book. There is an actual documentary, which is a very good documentary. It goes into a lot of detail. And her family sued, of course, and it took them years to get any type of compensation for their mother. Now, some of the things that have benefited from the HeLa cells was improvement of cancer treatments, a cure for polio, And if you know anything about polio was taking people out, baby. In the 40s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, polio was killing them. Literally. Killing them and crippling them. Because if you caught polio, you were either going to die or not be able to walk. Those are just the facts. Cure for polio. Improved treatments for cancer. Also was studied to cure diseases in animals. Helped with the development of the HIV, AIDS drugs for those patients. All kinds of things all around the world. People getting mad rich, mad recognition, super wealthy, super respected, experts in their field. And what did her family get? Next to nothing is what they got. Half of her children died before they even saw any type of real results and got any real resolution. She's buried on their family land in Virginia, and for the longest time, she had an unmarked grave because they couldn't afford to give her a headstone. They were tobacco farmers. They didn't really own a ton of land, so that means that they pretty much were working for somebody else. And then their father, her husband, was left as a single father to raise 5 kids on his own in 1951. Okay, and you know what else was going on during that time? Mad segregation, racial disparities, all that type of stuff. So Henrietta Lacks played shady to the left-hand side for her cells that are still in use today. All of these years later. 70 plus years later. Her cells are still being reproduced, still being used in studies, still being used to help cure things. Now, I'm pretty sure her family is not upset at the fact that her cells were used to help find cures for diseases, because that is a plus. It was the fact that they never knew that her cells were being used in the first place, nor was there permission given to use said cells. That's really what the problem is. And because she was a black woman, a young black woman at that, a young, uneducated black woman, as far as she had grade school education and didn't go beyond high school age because she got married young and started having children, and neither did her husband. So if you don't know what questions to ask, it's easy for you to be taken advantage of, which is exactly what happened to her and her children and her husband. Now, moving a little bit forward to modern medicine, according to the CDC, which you can go check out all of these stats on their site, there's still an overwhelming amount of doctors that don't believe that when a black woman says they have a problem or an issue, that they're actually in pain, or that there is an actual problem, or that there is an actual issue. They're not believed. In the CDC, the heart disease is the number one killer of African Americans, period. Heart disease. And the growth rate of new HIV/AIDS related cases is in the African American community. So, one, everybody needs to start wrapping it up. I'm just saying. But two, we need to start taking better care of ourselves. And it all ties into the food that is produced in this country, things that we eat, things that are in black neighborhoods that you won't find in other neighborhoods, like liquor stores on every other corner, fast food joints, 10 on one block, you buy, we fry type of places, lack of grocery stores with fresh produce. All of those things play a part into our health. What you have access to plays a part into your health. So that is definitely an issue, an ongoing issue that has been around for a good little while. Now, there have been studies that have been conducted regarding the treatment of African American women when it comes to medical professionals. In an article that was written by Dr. Janice Sabin, PhD, it's quoted that racial and ethnic disparities in pain treatment are not intentional. Instead, inequities are product of complex influences, including implicit biases that providers don't even know that they have. Now, we've talked about biases before on this show, and implicit bias is a subconscious thing, but that stems from that in a study, in the same article, she talks about a study that was conducted where 40% of first and second year medical students endorsed the belief that Black people's skin was thicker than white people's, which means that we're supposed to have a higher tolerance for pain, which goes to us being not believed when we say that we are in pain. Now, I've had personal experience in this, and I'm going to leave us on this small little antidote. I got into a really bad car accident when I was in my 20s. I was not driving. I was a passenger in the car. I was in a small car. We got hit by a big truck. We got hit on my side, and the next day, my entire right side of my body was stiff as a board. I had to go to the emergency room because I was in a lot of pain. Now, the doctor that I saw was man. He was one of these. He was a man. He asked a series of questions. I gave the answers, and he said, okay. They took the x-rays, they did the test. Nothing was broken, nothing was bruised, nothing was this, nothing was that. Nothing they could go in, surgically repair, anything like that. But he did give me muscle relaxer. Now, in the same token, he said, follow the instructions as written on the bottle. You don't want to take too many because it could stop your heart. Everybody knows that the heart is a muscle. Okay, yeah, we get that. But what, in his mind, looking at me as a 20-something, college-educated African-American woman, would make him think that I would want to overdose on muscle relaxers. Several years later, when I was in an appointment with my primary care doctor, who happens to be a Black woman, shout out to her, we were talking about something else, and then, I just happened to mention that this happened because I do have shooting back spasms since I've been in that accident, and we were talking about that. And when I told her this, she said, that's not how that drug works. It's not going to stop your heart. And I said, do you think he said that to me because he didn't want me to try and overdose on a muscle relaxer? And she said, probably because they don't always think before they speak. Meaning, they can easily offend you without trying to offend you. Not intentionally, but sometimes intentionally. So, with all of that being said, the way that we are treated when it comes to medicine and healthcare is not always the best. And you need to advocate for yourself, which is why we need more Black doctors, more Black dentists, more Black professors, more Black everything. Black on Black on Black. I'm always rooting for everybody's Black, as Issa Rae say. So, Just make sure that you advocate for yourself or get an advocate if you have to go to the hospital, if it is an emergency, somebody that's going to represent you and your best interests so that you can get the kind of care and treatment that you need. We're going to dive into this a little bit deeper, but come back next time because we got more to talk about. Thanks for tuning in to the Elle Bee Show. We hope you learned something today. The conversation doesn't end here. Send this to 2 people and keep it buzzing.